Welcome to the 10th episode of the What is Cycling podcast. I can't believe it's already been 10 episodes. Today I got to sit down with a very special guest, Steve Lovelace. Steve is a pioneer in the paratriathlons, being only the second disabled athlete to complete a triathlon. Listen to his story about becoming paralyzed, overcoming adversity, and putting his name in history. Let's go. Okay, so this podcast is about inspiring others and showcasing all the different types of riders and the styles out there. Steve's story is incredible, and personally, I think it's definitely going to inspire those to ride, but also not just on the bike, but in life. So, Steve, I just want to open up the floor to you to let you tell your story.
All right. So it goes back to 1982. We're going to time travel quite a ways back. I was 20 years old, just finished my first year of college at the University of Oklahoma, and my grandfather passed away that summer. So I ended up moving in with my grandmother in Wagner, which I'd lived in Wagner before. So I was no stranger to the farm and was there to help her deal with everything. Part of what I did on the side to make a little bit of extra money was cut firewood. And a buddy of mine and I went out to cut firewood one day on November 30th in 1982. Tackled a hackberry tree that was about 30 to maybe 36 inches across, very big tree. Tree ended up splitting in half somewhere along the way as we were trying to cut it down. It's called a barber chair in lumberjack terms. It's very dangerous, probably one of the most dangerous things you can actually deal with from a firewood or a tree cutting standpoint. At some point as he was cutting after it had fallen, the two halves shot back and basically slammed together on me. So I had a front half to my front, I had a half to my back. It caught my face from side to side. And when I woke up, and eventually what I came to realize is that three of my lumbar vertebrae had basically exploded. I had bruised my heart, crushed my left wrist, and crushed my face basically from the middle because it impacted me from the side. So I had as you can maybe see, my big scar on my forehead that I still carry. It fractured my mandible, fractured my hard palate. So I had basically a hole in the roof of my mouth up to my nasal cavity. Ended up in the hospital, and they told me at that time that I was likely never going to walk again because I was paralyzed from the waist down. I could not feel my legs at all. And it was instantaneous that happened. But at that point, I told them that, hey, I'm walking out of this hospital. I'm not listening to what you have to say. I've got my own opinion. And after 3.5 months of basically laying in a bed, literally wasting away, I went from 150 pounds down to 90 as I exited the hospital. Significant weight drop, no muscle, all pretty much bone and skin. But I did manage to walk 4 steps out of that hospital. I kept to my word because what had ended up happening is the swelling around my spinal cord was so intense that it literally cut off all feeling below the waist. And as that swelling ended up receding, I started gaining my feeling back little by little by little. It was extremely painful. But I managed to walk. Spent another 3.5 months in a rehab center before I was let go on my own to finish my rehab. And when they let me out of the rehab center, I was still barely able to walk across the floor with crutches. I mean, it was still very laborious, and I struggled with everything that I did. I was in intense and incredible pain. It's really hard to describe the amount of pain that I was in, on a slew of pills, every kind of pain pill you could imagine, muscle relaxer. It was horrible. But between being released from the rehab center and 1985, I worked on myself. I started lifting weights. I started walking. I learned how to run again. And then eventually I started doing 10Ks. And about 1985, maybe October, November, I was watching TV. And this was very fortuitous because had I missed this, none of this would have ever happened. Flipping through the channels, and here comes ABC's Wide World of Sports airing the 1985 Hawaiian Ironman World Championship. And I was fascinated immediately because I've always loved sport, and this combined three sports that I used to love: cycling before all this. I loved swimming, and I loved running. I was always moving back and forth as a kid. Then they replayed the 1982 version of Julie Moss crawling across the finish line. And it was something about her struggle and giving all that effort when she was yards from the finish line. And I knew that feeling and I knew that look because I had struggled to make it across the floor myself. But I had a goal of getting where I was going. And, I pushed through the pain, I pushed through the lack of energy and the lack of effort. And it was at that moment that I knew I wanted to do a triathlon. I didn't know how. I mean, I didn't even know what a triathlon was, to be honest with you, other than what I just witnessed. But I went out and I bought a used bike. It was an old Raleigh at a pawn shop. It was,
Oh,
I think it
nice.
was yeah, I wish I still had it, but it was a 56 CM. So, and I ride a 52. So as I stood over the top tube, it was right in my crotch. I mean, it was a big bike. It was way oversized for me, but it was $50 and I had 60. So that was my bike. Started riding, kept on running, ended up getting my lifeguard certification so I would have full time access to a swimming pool because I couldn't afford uh, a swimming pool membership anyway. And eventually, uh, June rolls around and it's time for the triathlon. And the only distance that I was really fully capable of covering, but it wasn't without walking and running, was the run. Had not ridden 25 miles, had not come close to swimming a mile, and had never done an open water swim at that point. It had all been pools, back and forth, lane swimming. But I started out, and at the end of this day, I crossed the finish line. I came in dead last amongst everybody. But what I failed to realize at that point in time, and I wasn't there to tell my story, I wasn't there to boast about, look what I'd been through and look what I'm doing now, as much as it was to prove to myself that I was A, still capable, and B, that, I could continue to push myself well beyond my boundaries and my limitations. And it wasn't until 35 years later, in fact, it was last year during COVID, that I started doing research on paratriathlon. And what I came to realize is that I was the second disabled athlete ever to do a triathlon, which when you realize something like that, it took me a while before it really soaked in that I'm actually part of history and I'm a pioneer of a sport when there are so few sport pioneers around now. So that's kind of led me to start telling my story. I ended up contacting USA Triathlon and got in touch with their foundation. And now I'm an ambassador for triathlon, the sport that I actually helped pioneer unwittingly. So which is also now an official Olympic sport. So to be the second guy to do a sport that turned out to be an Olympic sport is quite a it's quite an honor for me to realize that I did that. And again, I sought out no recognition, and the only reason I'm telling my story now is I hope to inspire others, that may be struggling, and to give cycling or triathlon a try because it can change your life in so many ways. And it changed mine back then, changed mine through the years, and is certainly changing it now, being able to tell my story.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what's amazing too is that I know in some instances, like if you're hit with such a serious problem like that, like going paralyzed below the waist and not getting defeated and turning that into a goal to achieve and kind of turning that situation into a positive, that's a that is very strong. Like that is amazing. And it's also amazing too that later in life, once you look back on it, you're like, holy crap, I was the second person. That's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and the funny thing is I got to talk to, well, I've exchanged emails with Scott Tinley, who was one of the pioneers of Ironman triathlon. And they were now taking my information as part of Tri History. They're starting to finally write up Tri History. And there's really no history for paratriathlon. You look online and they say, oh, it started as a sport well after I had done it, and well after the first guy, Pat Griskus, who was an amputee that was doing Ironmans. He's no longer with us. He died in a training accident, sadly. So that makes me the oldest living original pioneer of the sport, which again carries with a lot of weight and a lot of humility for me because, you know, again, I never set out to do this. It was just me pushing myself and trying a new sport at the time that was less than 8 or so years old at the time.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's so fantastic. And so to go back to the, I guess, the incident, when that tree collapsed on you and you were paralyzed below the waist, did you feel anything at all pain wise, or was it all nerves just were shot at that point?
I think the beauty of it was me being paralyzed and the weight of this massive tree weighing down on me and compressing me. It was difficult to breathe. I, you know,
Mm.
ended up, this may be a little bit graphic, but I felt something on my forehead. And as I put my hand up, my finger went between the skin and the skull. And I was
Oh,
just like,
goodness.
oh, that's not good. It was
Yeah.
just kind of one of those realizations. And I was already pretty much in shock by what had just happened. But I didn't really start feeling pain until hours after, to be honest. I mean, I carried on a casual conversation as I was pinned in this tree with the guys that were cutting me out. Not freaking out. I mean, I never cried. I never said, woe is me. I just kind of took it all in stride, knowing that, hey, I'm either going to make it or I'm not. And there's really nothing I can do about it except have a good attitude. So, and that's the blessing is no pain, man. Cause I can't imagine being there for 2 hours and feeling all this. I mean, it was tough enough with the tree, pressing on me, but to be in excruciating pain and, fairly religious guy, I think that was God's way of saying, let me take care of this because you got bigger things to do in life and we're going to get you through this.
Yeah, absolutely. That definitely is a blessing too. Did not feel any, because like you said it, how long did it take you from the incident? Like 3 hours?
2 hours. Yeah.
Oh, 2 hours. Yeah. I mean,
Mhm.
yeah, I could imagine that. And also not being able to do anything. Like, I'm happy that your adrenaline must have been running that full 2 hours so you didn't feel anything. And then, because that would be absolutely brutal.
Yeah.
And so, what did the recovery process look like to kind of get your legs functioning again?
So as I'm in the hospital bed, they couldn't operate on my spine. The swelling was so extreme. They had me in a bed that rotated side to side. And this particular bed took the place of a striker bed, which striker beds is what they use to prevent fluid from settling in your lungs and getting pneumonia. Because when you can't move, that's ideal, or, essentially what ends up happening. So I called the bed my rotisserie because it went, 15 degrees this way and it slowly rotated the other way. Um, they I was in the ICU for a little over 2 weeks, I think, before they did my back surgery, and then I moved to a step down orthopedic ward. But it was so painful at some point there. I don't remember when it all came in. They had me on morphine, and it was IM, so intramuscular. And morphine is such a horrible drug, but it did such a great job of taking the pain away and mainly made me sleep a lot. But after they did all the surgeries, they couldn't move me because there was really nobody that wanted to operate on me. Once they knew what they were dealing with, I was a huge liability from an operational standpoint. But I had two guys, a neurosurgeon and an orthopedic surgeon, that took on the surgery when nobody else would, thank God. And they just pieced my back together. But they had to leave me immobile. So I only moved side to side with a pillow up underneath me for about 8 weeks. I had my mouth wired shut. I was being fed by a nasogastric tube. So that's
Mm.
where all the significant weight loss came in. And there were a couple of times where I was able to get a blended up pizza and suck it
Wow.
through a straw. Yeah,
Yeah.
not my favorite. I still love pizza's like one of my favorite foods ever. But sucking it through a straw is just not where it's at. Uh, but they didn't start doing rehabilitation on me until maybe 8 weeks after my surgery. And then it started with just barely lifting my leg, maybe 5 degrees off the bed, which was extremely excruciating. But I learned to time getting my pain shot right before I knew my therapy session was going to happen, so I could get through a therapy session, one, pain free, and two, I could use that painkiller to let them push me even harder with less pain.
Mm.
So I've always been kind of a glutton for punishment for, where pain's concerned, and maybe that's why I chose triathlon, because it's a brutal sport. You have to be a glutton for punishment to push yourself, endurance wise, for hours upon hours. But it was just, small baby steps. And I think the one thing that I remember in the hospital when I first got to stand up, they took me to radiology where they have tables that would slowly stand up, and they would just take me up, and the pressure from being horizontal for 8+ weeks to barely doing this again, pain was intense because all that blood flow is now going down to my feet, which I
Oh
just
yeah.
started feeling. And but the ironic thing is I grew an inch laying in bed with no compression on my spine after all that time. I was like 5'9", whereas now I've shrunk down to 5'7" again over time.
Wow.
Yeah, but that was pretty interesting, and it was just a lot of brutal pushing, and just having to deal with it. And I just knew that that was something I had to do if I was going to get myself back to health. I couldn't be this guy that, whimpered and cried and said, "Oh, I can't do it." And one of the things that I say now is, don't say I can't, say I'll try. And it was as a direct
I
result
love
of
that.
doing all that. So,
Yeah, I love that. And you talking about the pizza, it reminds me. So back in high school, the goalie for the soccer team, he something happened, and I think he took a header, like someone trying to do a header into his face, and it broke his jaw.
hmm.
And so he got had to get his mouth wired shut, and he would bring in the nastiest looking, and I go on quote, milkshakes, because it was like, "What are you eating today?" And he's like, "Steak and potato." Well, he'd be with his mouth shut. He'd be like, "Steak and potatoes."
Yeah.
It's the nastiest, like a gray looking milkshake. I'm like, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's
Yeah,
nutrition. And think about the stuff that we drink now. I mean, protein drinks, they're not the best tasting. You kind of have to choke some of that stuff down, but it's a necessary evil to get the nutrients that you need to do what we do from a cycling or a triathlon perspective, or even just general life.
yeah, absolutely. And that's yeah, nutrition is nutrition and water, obviously, and especially with any sort of endurance too, you definitely have to find that balance as well, because if you don't, you're gonna bonk and you're not gonna do anything.
Yeah, yeah. That's I always say it's the fourth discipline of triathlon, and it's the most important because it affects all three disciplines ahead of it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so I like that you turned this into the goal. And so you said you like cycling and running and swimming. How did the swim go for you when in being in open water? Because if that's your first experience with that, I can only imagine that with everyone else swimming, it's probably putting water in your face and your mouth, nose,
Mhm.
everything. So how did that go for you?
Well, being the confident guy that I am, I pushed myself up in front of the pack, which was a huge mistake. And it had rained like a torrential downpour the night before. So the lake water was super cold. And this was early June in Oklahoma, which now you're almost always going to find it being wetsuit legal. Back then, there were no wetsuits. You were either tough enough to do it or you weren't. And I stepped up, I towed the line, and I'm like, I'm going to do this. My calves started cramping on me, and I ended up having to hang off, the safety raft a couple of different times, which is perfectly legal. And I, recommend it to anybody that doesn't think they can do the swim. Is you got people there that have your back, and you can get through it. It's no different than swimming in a pool, doing laps, and then stopping on one to catch your breath, let your heart rate go down, then going back at it. It essentially works the same way. But I made it through the swim. I came out, and as I looked back over my shoulder, there were still several people in the water. So I wasn't last, which was kind of a badge of honor for me, especially with what I'd been through. But um, I never lacked the confidence because I was doing a lot of swimming. I just never knew how far I was going, but it certainly wasn't a mile. And the lake had risen by such a significant amount. I bet it added, 250 meters to the swim, to be honest with you.
Wow.
Yeah, there was a
Yeah,
lot.
it's
In
very
fact,
misleading.
yeah. Well, the ironic thing is that when I finished the run portion, and I came back around to where our tent was the night before, I'd gone with a buddy and we had pitched tent lakeside. The tent was about 2 feet underwater, so
Holy
you
cow.
know, we ended up having to fish all our stuff out and fish that out. And as we drove up there, this guy had a Volkswagen Bug that we drove with. There was no bike rack. We had our bikes Jethro Bodined on the back of this Bug. It was probably quite a sight to see, almost as if you were watching people go to Woodstock with all their crazy stuff.
Oh, yeah.
But we managed to make it there and do our thing. So
And so that was the night before that everything was
yeah,
underwater. And so
yeah.
all your stuff, was it everything soaked before the race too?
Pretty much, I think. Well, at some point we abandoned the tent because the rain and the wind was so bad, and we ended up sleeping in the Bug, which I don't remember getting any sleep, to be honest with you. I just remember because there was no reclining seats that I recall. We were just sitting there going, "Oh my God, this is going to be so tough and brutal." We had uh, I had cycling shorts, and I was I had like cycling shorts. I had running shorts, and I had. Like a running T-shirt that I was going to wear. I was under the impression, because I'd seen the Ironman, that they were going to have changing tents, and I was going to come out of the water and I was going to be able to switch my gear. I saw no changing tent that morning, so instead of wearing my trunks, I just pulled my cycling shorts on. And again, that was kind of way ahead of the curve because that's what everybody started doing. Um, I mean, you just kind of, it was one of those things that, okay, what are you going to do? Well, this is the only option. And so I did it, and never took them off. But I will tell you, wearing a wet chamois is not,
Yeah.
not a lot of fun starting out on the bike for sure.
Especially if it's cold too. That water,
Yes.
that's pretty rough. Sounds like SEAL training.
Yeah. I often thought, and I tried several times to get in the military, to be honest, way before this, and even after. And I always thought, man, if I do it, the Navy SEAL's the way to go, because again, I love pushing myself, and not to discredit anything those guys do. I don't know that I could make it, but I'd like to think in my heart that I'm strong enough that I can push through all that stuff, and I would have made a good SEAL given the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, granted, first time meeting you and talking to you, but just hearing your story and learning what I know about you, just your mental strength and toughness, but also it sounds like your adaptability to situations and stuff is very remarkable. So I would have probably pretty high expectations for you to go into SEAL
Thank you.
training.
That means a lot. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, how did the recovery after the incident? How did the recovery and like your training and everything leading up to a triathlon? How did that kind of change, or how did it work?
Well, I mean, the recovery took a couple of years. I mean, it was probably, oh man, I'd say a year and a half before I really felt like I could go out and enter a 10K, after working really hard. And the first one, I probably walked the majority of it, but I was so into the challenge of going from point A to point B and pushing myself. I didn't care how I finished. I just wanted to get out there and finish, because that ultimately is the big accomplishment. It I was never out there to win. I never measured myself by the guy standing next to me. It was always me against the course and me against the clock. So when I started training for triathlon, it was just, I was under the assumption you had to do all three sports every day to be able to do this, because, you know, there was no internet. You couldn't go online. And I mean, now, man, you can find umpteen sprint training sessions or 70.3s. I mean, they're all out there. And back then it was just kind of like trial and error. And I could not afford any type of drink mix. So when I was riding the bike, it was strictly water, maybe a couple of snacks here and there. And I mean, you can only go so far with and it was a single set of braisons, so I had one water bottle. I could not
Oh my
afford a
goodness.
jersey to put it in my back. Um, there were a couple of times where I knew the route that I was going to be taking, and I would stash a water bottle on the way, and then I would just drive back out to pick it up, or I would just leave it till the next time. And but you figure out these little nuances, and I knew that I was going to have to be able to swim on a regular basis. At the time, I had no access to a swimming pool, but my brother-in-law was going to Tulsa University, and he snuck me into their Olympic swimming pool. And so I owe a great debt to Tulsa University and their swimming program for allowing me to get in there, because that's where I trained up to get my lifeguard certification. And then I worked for Tulsa Parks and Recreation and was a lifeguard for them and had access to a pool. Kept my lifeguard certification up for years. And I still tell my kids today, that's the best job, because you're just hanging out, getting some vitamin D, and, watching your pretty girls walk around the pool. I mean, what better job do you have? And not to be too voyeuristic, but, you're there.
Yeah.
And so that I found a way. And then I started working for, eventually I worked a second job, Sun and Ski Sports, so that I could get a discount on gear, because I couldn't afford to pay full price. I mean, I was very, very destitute at the time. Barely few able to put a few dollars together at any point in time. And I saved up for my first pair of cycling shorts. And the funny thing was that everybody, when they saw me in these, they're like, "Oh, that's so cool," because they'd never seen Lycra before, and certainly never seen anybody wear it on a public basis. But I wore it poolside as I was swimming for, the as a lifeguard. And you just kind of do what you do, man. Adapt and overcome, right? Over, under, through, or break it down.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's that's pretty amazing. You're just setting the tone for everything. I mean, you pretty much were doing it before it was cool, so that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, just in retrospect, it's like I had a lot of fun doing it, but there were a lot of challenges. And I had the car that I was driving at the time, the dashboard where the radio and the heater and the air conditioner was chiseled out. Literally, there was like a gaping hole, and you had all these wires sticking out. The car had a crack in the block, so it constantly leaked water. I had to carry a 5-gallon jug of water in the trunk, and I always took my bike everywhere I went in case it broke down. I had a second mode of transportation. Um,
That's smart.
yeah,
Yeah, because I mean, that's what I always tell everyone. Everyone's like, "Oh, well, I want to get into cycling. I need to buy X, Y, and Z, but it's really expensive." I'm like, "You really don't have to. Like,
hmm
if you like, just get out there, try it, see if you like it before you invest all this money." But my money's on that you're really gonna enjoy it. And even with just what you have now, you don't have to be out there buying $10,000 bikes, $300 shoes, or anything. Like, you can do it to
right.
match your budget, and it's gonna be fun regardless.
Yeah. Yeah. I started with pusher pedals, and then I ended up buying plastic toe clips, and I ended up buying Lotto shoes. I don't know if you remember Lotto, but these were the ones, they had perforated holes all through them, and,
Oh, okay.
into the toe clips. And I actually enjoyed toe clips. It wasn't really much of a challenge for me to figure them out. But now you see people that are like, "How did you ride in that?" I'm like, "Dude, it was a necessary evil to go faster." I mean, if you can only push down on the pedal, you're missing a lot of the effort by pulling up and pushing forward. So, I learned all that stuff, and I ended up buying my first Look pedals, which came out in, I think I bought them in '88. Was my first set of Look pedals, and I got me some CD shoes, and man, I never looked back after that. And that was a Greg LeMond inspired thing. Um, and I wish I had that my my second bike too. It was a Torpedo Rosa. It was an Italian manufacturer. It used to be very, very reputable, way back in the day. And I loved that bike. It was a pink bike, so it was kind of like your uh, the Pirata, or the, man, who am I thinking of? Marco Pantani. Sorry, there you go.
Oh, okay.
The pirate. Yeah, he wore pink, and I mean that was all kind of way before. And pink was kind of vogue back then, because this was the '80s, and pastels and all that all those colors. So I was
And
proud to
now they're
ride
making a
tape.
comeback. Yeah. See,
Yeah,
once again,
absolutely.
before it got cool. So yeah,
Yeah,
that's awesome.
yeah.
And it's really funny. Like, I know I mentioned this on the last episode, but once you ride clips and then you go back to flats,
Oh,
it's like trying to learn a new language. It's impossible to
yeah.
do. I did it and I was like, this is terrible. I can't do this. I had to ride a city bike in New York and I was like, what's happening? The pedal doesn't come up with me. I'm like, this is awful.
Yeah, yeah. I've got my son, he's got a set of SPDs that'll turn over to flats. They'll rotate. You can either clip in on one
Oh, that's
side or
cool.
go flats on the other, which is kind of cool in case you just need to do a zip down the street or whatever. And I rode that. And you're right. I mean, it's like, wow, it's a whole new setup.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
used to have those for the mountain bike I had because I am definitely rode to mountain bike and I don't even really ride a mountain bike that much anymore. But anytime I would get on the section where I'm like, I might have to bail, I would just switch to the flats and just ride it downhill. It was a little bit safer. You live with constant pain, correct?
I do. Yeah.
And so you don't take any pain meds at all,
No.
or do you?
Well, the one thing that I take on a semi-regular basis is prednisone. It's the only
Okay.
drug that will cross the blood-brain barrier and reduce swelling of the spinal cord, especially with my particular disease, which is arachnoiditis. It's constant swelling of the arachnoid tissue that surrounds the spinal cord. So when I have a flare-up, which happens, man, it could be caused by food, but mostly it's caused by weather. When we have storms moving through, I can feel it. My body
Oh,
temperature
like the pressure
raises.
and all that?
Yeah, yeah, and then
Oh, man, that's
and
rough.
the ironic thing is my pain is all pretty much concentrated in my right foot. The one blessing that I get out of this is that I can ride a bike pretty much pain free with that. It's just that I pay the price with my back. It's My back is fused and I have a little bit of scoliosis as a result of the fusion. So when I ride, I'm a little bit off center on the bike and one leg is a little bit longer than the other, and I kind of struggle with that because I ride a my crank length is 172.5 and one leg could probably use a 170, which would be kind of
Mhm.
a weird setup, but I'm so used to the way it is right now that I just go with it versus going to somebody that says, fix me and, help me with this and help me with that. I don't want to mess what's already working for me. But I do end up riding and getting off the bike, with your endorphins pretty much at their highest. I'm pretty much pain free for a significant period of time. And then the pain starts creeping back in as the endorphins wear off. But, endorphins are nature's pain reliever anyway.
Yeah, because that was my question is, like, how do you deal with the pain? Because I'm sure, like, it's probably pretty excruciating, especially from I mean, cycling isn't the best posture and positioning for your
Right.
back too, so I can only imagine.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a necessary evil to do what I love. And somebody asked me the other day, you got 6 hours to live, or, before the world comes to an end, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to spend time with my family. And I'm going to ride my bike. I mean, because I worry every day with my disease that if I wake up one day, I may not be able to ride. And that will be probably the toughest day that I'll face. But I've got the mindset that I'll just go to a hand cycle and I'll still be out there pushing myself with all these other people. And though I may be recumbent, I'm still feeling that wind in my hair and I'm still getting the rush of the downhill and the struggle of going up a hill, which I love. I love to push myself. And I mean, unless you've ridden and you know what that does for you, you'll never get it. Which is why I encourage everybody to A, ride a bike, and B, try triathlon.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Climbing is probably one of my favorite things on the bike, but also it's like I see both sides to like running. I like the endurance and I like how much fitness you can get in such a short amount of time. But
Hmm.
with cycling, it's like, okay, if you want to go run 3 miles, I can take you anywhere from like 20 to 40 to an hour or something. But with cycling, if you want to really get a good workout in, it can take you anywhere from like 1 to 4 to 7 hours. It just all depends. But I like with
Right.
cycling too, you can really cover the distance. You can see just all of God's creation in such a quick amount of time and stuff like that. So it's just so amazing.
Yeah, and then you get to go downhill, and I learned to
Yeah.
climb when I was a cycling instructor at a boys' camp in 1988. It was Camp Mackinac in Lenox, Massachusetts, and you got all these rolling hills and mountains, and man, we used to ride out, and I rode with a guy from Arizona State that used to race out there, and his name was Joe Armstrong, and he was like, "Okay, Lovelace, I want you to go on a breakaway," and it was at the bottom of a hill, and I'm like, "Oh, this is a perfect time for a breakaway." But I would take off, and I would get the distance, and then I remember one time I had the old cat eye computer that basically,
Okay.
you could cycle through, and it only
Yeah.
stored up to 10,000 miles before it reset or whatever. I went downhill, the fastest I've ever gone downhill, 55 miles an hour. That's scary as all
Holy
get out.
cow. Yeah.
I mean, I
Heck
was
no.
zooming. Yeah, and you don't want to hit gravel when you're going that fast.
Oh no. You don't want to hit
But it
anything
was
going
so
that
fun.
fast.
No, man, I would have been. Yeah, it would have taken layers of skin off.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I hear the professionals and stuff, and they're like, "Oh yeah, we hit 100K going like 100
Yeah,
kilometers an hour, and it's like like 60 miles per hour or something like that." I'm like, that
yeah,
is blistering fast. And even then,
yes,
they'll be like, "All right, guys, let's kind of calm down a little bit. We're going too fast." I'm like, by like what feels like 20 miles an hour.
yeah. You can melt a brake pad if you have to stop quick. I mean, you can heat them up quick, right?
Oh
And,
yeah,
and the
absolutely.
the thing about it back then was, you had to alternate front and back, front and back, front and back, just so you would prevent that, because it would start gumming up the rim, and
Oh
that's
yeah,
a whole
definitely.
nother issue. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's why they're trying to push to disc brakes and stuff now. Just,
Hmm.
but I mean, a lot of the pros too still are like, no, give me my
Caliper.
um, yeah, give me my caliper
Yeah.
brakes and
Yeah.
stuff.
I
And it's
have
like
a
all just about a weight issue.
Yeah. I was talking to my neighbor who's got an old Trek bike, still with the down tube friction shifting. And I'm like, man, I used to love my friction shifting. I could dial that in, because with STI or, with index shifting, if it's not dialed in right, you're going to get the click, 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 click. And I hate
Oh
that.
yeah,
Then
yeah,
you got to stop and you have to adjust your cable. And yeah, no,
yeah. I
dial
still
it
love
in,
seeing
baby.
those. Yeah, every once in a while, I think like State Bicycle, they do their own. It's like it might be like a 3 speed,
Hmm.
and they have the down tube shifting as well. And I'm like, that's
Yeah,
just such a good look. It's like
it
that's a
is.
classic look for me. Yeah.
It is. Yeah. A lot of people are like, man, can't imagine reaching down. Oh, you just get used to it. I mean, if you're on the drops, it's just right there. So, not a big
Yeah, it's not
issue.
that far of a motion.
No.
So now how do you challenge yourself today? And do you still compete in triathlons today?
I did my first two triathlons since, well, I basically ended triathlon back in 1990 or 91. I can't remember exactly. And then I switched over strictly to cycling. It just got to do three sports. That I'd graduated college and I was working full time, and I still didn't have things figured out as far as a training perspective with triathlon back then. So I went over to cycling. Um, I did my first one, and I can't really run anymore. I wear two bilateral AFOs, and back here, this is this is what I ride with.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and it's all this is where is that? It's magnetic, so just kind of it's almost like a clip in clip out type scenario.
Uh-huh.
Um, but that allows me, because I can't put pressure on my forefoot, so the ball of my foot where you would normally push down on the pedal, I can't. My heel just kind of does this. But with
Oh,
those, I
okay.
can put that in. It's carbon fiber. Doesn't really give me an advantage because I still, my legs below the knee work about 20% of what they should. So it's a significant loss of ability and function. But the first two triathlons that I did with a friend of mine. She's a 5 foot marathoner, and she's a dynamo, man. I think the first race we did, she was cranking out 6 minute miles, and she's like almost 60 years old. So that was pretty impressive. And she partnered with me. We did a relay on the second, and I am the weak link, because when I go from, I'm improving on my swimming. It's been years since I've been in the pool. I've been riding, so I got the ride no problem. But when I get out of the water, I hobble and I have to have help, getting to the transition area. Then it takes me a while to put on my AFOs and my cycling gear. And that presents another problem walking at a transition. So I probably lose, man, anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes to every other competitor just going, in T1. But the first two races we did, we actually finished pretty respectfully. And I told her, I said, had I just improved on my swim a little bit and done a little bit better in transition, we probably would have finished in maybe the top five collectively over. And I think there were 11 teams in the second race that we did, which, for an old fart like myself with my lack of ability, I was pretty proud of that, to be honest with you. And I
Yeah, no,
think there
that's
was
awesome.
yeah, I part of the I started in a wave after on the swim, and I think I lost 2 minutes just initially because I failed to start on time, which that would have moved us up a couple of places from where we finished anyway. So
Yeah, I mean, that's impressive anyway. And I was reading an article and it was saying that you let's see, you ran at your miles at a pace of like 8:58 or something. Is that
that
am
well,
I
I did a 10K, like it was like at 8:45.
10K?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and before that, right after I'd done that first triathlon, and I did a second one in Norman when I started back at the University of Oklahoma. They had the 12-minute run challenge. I took an exercise physiology class, and a buddy of mine and I ran the 12-minute run. We did 2 miles flat, so I ran 2 6-minute miles after barely being able to shuffle across the floor 3 years earlier. That was a big badge of honor for me.
Yeah, that's remarkable. I couldn't probably run a 10K at like a 10-minute per mile pace.
Well,
I
well, you
running is
could eventually, but yeah.
eventually, but yeah,
Yeah.
that is so amazing. Yeah, hats off to you because I mean I've said it before, and I got a quote from you where you said, "My accident and coming back from it wasn't the reason I was there. I set a goal to become a triathlete. I worked to achieve that goal. I wanted to close the loop." And
Yeah.
I love that because your life just seems like you get something in your head. Everything came about because of the accident and the tree cutting. But now, because of that, it's just goal and then goal and then goal. And it allows you to make everything a little bit more digestible. And because I feel like if someone gets into this scenario, it would definitely be easy to get overwhelmed and
Hmm.
then feel like you don't have enough power and willpower.
Right.
And you could easily start setting yourself up for doubts and letting horrible thoughts come in and stuff. What would you say to someone that maybe has a disability and they're kind of nervous about getting in to cycling or triathletes or just sports in general? Or maybe not even sports, if they're just kind of worried about getting over that hump, what would you say to them and how should they go about that situation?
The way I did it, I didn't tell anybody. And I think that worked to my benefit because there were no naysayers out there. Oh man, what are you doing? In fact, when I finished my first triathlon, I think somebody said, "Now you're not going to do that again so you don't hurt yourself." Are you crazy? I mean, I'm a try. I, as I had said at some point, I was one of the few triathletes in the world at that time. I mean, you could probably measure it by anywhere between 50 and 100,000 people worldwide that were doing triathlon at that time. And I'm one of the first two disabled people. So I blazed my own trail. And it was just basically doing, well, I started out aggressively trying to do all three sports. I failed miserably and I started backing off and kind of working on my weaknesses and letting my strength take care of itself. What I came to realize is that you can do a series of all these small moves. And then when it's put together on race day, that's really what it's all about. You don't have to put that together beforehand to convince yourself. But more importantly, if you're disabled, just have a close, cohesive unit of people that know your mental fortitude and your resilience and your strength, and they'll back you at every place. And don't measure yourself against what somebody else did before you, because I had nothing to measure myself by. Nothing. No bicyclists, no swimmers, no runners, no triathletes that I knew that. Well, there was one runner I knew that was disabled, a guy named Terry Fox from Canada, had amputee just below the hip. This guy had set a goal of running a marathon a day across Canada. He fell just
Wow.
short, went into remission, ended up dying. They made a movie about him. The guy's still a hero in my book because his strength gave me strength. And that was honestly the only disabled hero that I knew of back then. There weren't anybody. And I never, my biggest fear was that had the organizers or anybody known of my accident, that they would have gone, we can't let this guy on the course. I mean, what if something happens? I mean, we're liable for this. So I told nobody. And that's part of the reason that I kept my story hidden for so long. But just, if you have confidence in yourself, I think that's really all that matters. And take it a bite-sized chunk, after a bite-sized chunk. Don't try to bite it all off at one fell swoop. Build up, build your confidence, and, just have that group of people behind you being cheerleaders, but don't announce it to the world. I mean, I would think the worst thing you could do is come out of the hospital and say, I'm going to go do the Ironman. If you did it, great. But if you fell short, now you're going to be hard on yourself. Wow. Now I have to live up to that expectation that I failed to live up to. And that can be demoralizing in and of itself.
Yeah, I definitely think that that's just great advice for life in general. And of course, it's football season now, and I might not like Tom Brady, but the Under Armour commercial where it's like he's writing a letter to high school football players, and he's talking about, like, listen, when they call you, you're the next Tom Brady or you're the next GOAT, don't listen to them,
Right.
because the only competition that matters is who you look at in the mirror, and that's you. And I'm like, that's a really good commercial because I mean, just in life, we all compare ourselves to other people, whether if you're racing and cycling, you compare to whoever, or if you're just in life and any other sport. So if you just take it a day at a time and you just challenge yourself, but try not to compare, you definitely won't be as hard on yourself. But
Right.
you can still really challenge yourself and get what you need out of it.
Yeah. And, just looking in the mirror, you can't lie to that guy. He's always going to be able to call you out. Right. So another great thing is, maybe write your goals down, but you don't have to share them with anybody, and never be afraid to change your goals. I set lofty goals for myself, but I had a series of small goals that would get me there. And that's really the key to it, is not aggressively going after the gold medal, but it's, working on the minutia. How do I build my time at the end, when I need to close the gap, and I need to train with that, and just really work on those small points that make a big difference. But, even going full circle back to what we talked about earlier, don't neglect your nutrition, don't neglect your sleep, don't neglect the weights, because all that stuff is going to make you stronger. And I would say working weights is probably the better aspect of an endurance athlete versus just going out and pushing for the miles, because it's the muscles that power the bike, and if you can push up a hill that much faster because you did, 3 sets of whatever, then you're going to see the benefit of that. And you're going to have that self acceptance from a body image as well. I mean, who doesn't love to see a goose egg on their arm, right?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
point. And also, if you do tell your goals to that core group that you were talking about, I think that that's a good idea as well too, because also it kind of makes it real. Because
Yeah.
also if you keep it hidden to yourself, you can't lie to that person, but it's a little bit easier to give in, to be like, I don't feel like it today. But if you're like,
Right.
hey, I'm gonna go do this, and you tell someone, and if especially if they keep track of it and they keep asking you about it, you're like, man, I gotta do this. I'm like, this sucks.
Yeah. Accountability.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
And that's, the one thing that is a little bit different about me, from way back then, is I trained exclusively by myself. I never rode with a group back then. I never swam with anybody. I just jump in the pool. I wouldn't talk to anybody. I just kind of did my own thing. That's good if you have the ability to push yourself by yourself. But if you need that coach, and that was another thing that I would suggest is I had no coach. And, technique is a lot of uh, avoiding injury and improving outcome. I would say maybe seek a coach because they would help you stay accountable, and they will push you because they're going to know your limits after the first day you're in the pool or first day they see you on a bike. They're going to know what they need to work on. So that would be another good suggestion for anybody getting into the sport. And with the USA Triathlon Foundation, we try to break those financial barriers down that a lot of people run into, whether it be equipment, which is very expensive when you do a triathlon, or it could be coaching, and getting them the coaching that they need. Just even if you're just starting out, a coach would be probably solid information that would help you, even if you don't think you're an athlete. You are if you think you are.
Yeah, I know personally, I've had a coach when I got into cycling. When I wanted to get serious about it, I paid for a coach, and it was remarkable. Just
Mm-hmm.
you had the accountability, you had the plan, you knew, like, he knew what my goals were and what I wanted to achieve in cycling. So he was able to tailor the plan to my needs. And just to kind of have that support system as well, it was remarkable. And then I hear, like, I know a few people that are cycling coaches, and just to hear some of the other individuals' goals, like, some people's goals are to ride in a group or complete like one of the group rides, or maybe it is to go set a world record or something like that. But and for my experience, like, man, those miles really added up. As soon as I got
Mm-hmm.
the coach, it was just remarkable, because then I was like, well, I'm paying for it, and if I'm paying for it, dang, I better use it.
Absolutely, yeah. They're not cheap, but it's a cost benefit analysis is that you're going to improve regardless, and then you'll have all that knowledge that you can work from. Whereas if you try to piece it all together, it's like doing self diagnosis of a medical condition through WebMD. You're going to have all these things that you have, but you're never going to focus on the one thing that could really make a difference for you and really be the key point or the keystone of your training.
Yeah, that's a really good point too. Throughout your training and triathlons and stuff, did you ever sustain like any pretty serious injuries?
Concussions. Yeah, I've had several concussions. Um, there was one where I was riding through the neighborhood and just a little bit of mist had started to fall. It was early in the morning. It was still kind of dark, and I took this corner. And when it starts to rain, or just starts to rain, or starts to mist, the oil comes up out of the asphalt. And I took
It
this
is
corner
so
a little
slick.
hard. Yes. And my wheels just went zoo right up from underneath me. I didn't have a helmet on, couldn't afford a helmet back then. Bam, I hit my head. And that was an eye opener. It was a kind of a posterior lateral hit. I made it through that okay. There was no, I don't think it broke the tissue, but it banged me around quite a bit. And it was shortly after that that I found out that I was going to have a helmet for the triathlon. It was a requirement, and I think I ended up getting a skid lid. I don't know if you know what the skid lid is, but
I don't think so.
it next to the hairnet, which was the old leather, straps that went
Oh,
across.
yeah,
The
yeah,
skid
yeah.
lid had two things that went up, but they didn't meet this way, and they had two things that went up that didn't meet this way. So it was open at the crown of your head, and yeah, but I think that's if I recall. And then I moved over to this big, massive bell helmet, and it took me a while before I realized that riding with the helmet was going to be essential. And I was in a bike shop. They had this picture of a guy that, and the caption below it was, I went on a test ride of a new bike. He's like, I barely went a block, but he had this big C cut and maybe 26 or 36 staples.
Oh man.
And I was looking at that picture, and the guy says, wear a helmet. And from that point forward, I wore a helmet, and I still have the last helmet that I bought when that happened. It was an old Specialized helmet. And then I think I wrecked in it one time. It's got a skid mark on the side. But helmets are essential and critical. I had 2016. I was on a training ride coming in to the neighborhood. It was a downhill right hand corner into the neighborhood, and I looked over my shoulder. There was no car, so I did a wide swing out, and I was going to take the corner hard inside, which I did. And then I woke up sitting in the middle of the street. I
Oh
looked at
my
my
goodness.
Garmin later on, 27 miles an hour, and it just goes zoop down to zero. So I had a head first
Oh.
impact at 27 miles an hour. That one changed me significantly. It took me a couple years to get over that concussion. I was light sensitive. I had all kinds of
Mm.
emotional and, hitting the frontal bone is where all your intellect is. So there was a lot that went on there. But I would say definitely never go ride without a helmet. I get so pissed when I see people put their kids on bikes with no helmets. Man.
Yeah, yeah, it's very essential. I know a few people that, and it's crazy that I know a few, but I know a few people that have actually been cycling or struck by a cyclist and gotten a concussion to where they pretty much have to shut their mind down and
Yeah.
they can't have like lights on, they can't have TV on, they can't, just because they can't process the information because it might do permanent damage to them. And that's like, it's kind of a scary thing to think about when you really think about it, but it's just kind of crazy. But yeah, please, listeners, wear your helmet.
Yes. Yeah. They are cool. They're not, you know, despite the contrary. My son would say, "Oh, that's not cool" early on, but he is an avid helmet wearer as well. So,
Yeah, I used to think they weren't cool in my skateboarding days, but now with all the different colors and styles and
yeah.
everything, I'm like, they're so cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I'm an ambassador for Lem helmets. And
Oh, sweet.
yeah, in fact, I wrote the guy that I'd corresponded with that opened it up to me, and I noticed a picture of Harrison Ford, and he had the same helmet on that I have, which is a Motive Air. And I wrote him, I was like, "This looks like Harrison Ford is wearing a Motive Air." And he's like, "Oh yeah, he's a huge fan of our helmets." And I'm like, "That's so cool."
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah,
Man, we got to get Harrison Ford on the podcast.
yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
so you're a Oklahoma Sooners fan.
yes, yes. A graduate of OU.
Oh, okay. I was just about to ask if you graduated from there. So,
Yep,
did you do any cycling while you were at the university?
I did, and I never really raced a lot. I did a couple of local races. I actually, my big claim to fame is that same summer in 1986, I raced against a young Lance Armstrong at a triathlon. He ran away
That's
with it.
sweet.
Yeah, and the funny thing is, we were he had a live show that you could tune into. They had him and Hencappy would do this live conversation as they were riding, and I was on the ride one day, one of the first ones that they did, and I chimed in and I said, "Hey, um, my name's Steve, and I helped pioneer the sport of paratriathlon. And the funny thing is, you and I raced against each other in Norman." He's like, "Oh yeah, I raced a lot up in Oklahoma and down in Texas because he's from Texas." And so he was doing this whole regional thing. He was 16 years old, and he just blew away the field. I mean, just talk about he was say what you want about his doping and all the negativity there. The guy still got skills, and without the doping, if it was an equal playing field, he would still be amazing.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And he kind of paved the way for US cycling, like in
Yes,
the Tour de
thank
France and
God.
everything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Now
Yeah, that's
Lamont was my
awesome.
hero before him because that he came up to the ranks in '86 and all through '90, and I watched a lot of every summer was Tour de France. Month of July, that was the only thing that I would watch, and it would come on the weekends. They would do like a 2 hour segment, and I would record it, and I'd watch it over and over and over on my VCR when I was in college, and that was my virtual Wahoo, or
Oh,
that
yeah.
my, you know what I mean? It was
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I always love doing that. When I'm on the trainer, I watch like crit videos or Tour de France highlight videos or
yeah,
whatever just to keep me motivated and going on there. But that's awesome. I've always heard, so I'm from Boone, and for all the listeners out there who don't know, Boone is where Appalachian State University is, and Appalachian State
mm,
University just beat Texas A&M. And then years
Oh,
ago,
right.
they are the ones that crushed Michigan when Michigan was like number 5 or number 1 or whatever.
Yeah.
But so Lance Armstrong used to come, allegedly, used to go up to Banner Elk where it's Beach Mountain and like Grandfather Mountain and stuff, and would train up those mountains because it's
Hmm.
just such high elevation and it's such high elevation gain in such a quick amount of time that I've always heard like he would just go out there and just do laps.
Wow.
So, but of course I wasn't into cycling at the time. So
Yeah.
wasted opportunity.
Closest thing we have is Mount Scott down in Lawton, which is a 2 mile climb, about 6% average. It's a nice steady climb, but it's nothing like what I got when I was on the East Coast. And, I'm sure you could totally kick the mountains. And I just, you know, you either love mountains and climbing or you hate them.
Yeah.
And at first, I did not. I rode every flat section of road I could find because I just could not do the inclination. But eventually, I figured if I'm going to get better, I have to start climbing. And it doesn't matter where I start because I know I'll get better. I'll get stronger. I just learned to embrace it because you just get in that steady rhythm. And as long as you don't break mentally or physically, you just keep up on that steady pace. It's like a metronome. But
Hmm.
the minute you change the speed of that metronome, you're done. You're over. And you
Absolutely.
you watch the guys on in the pro ranks when they're riding at tempo and then they're done. You're never going to get it back. And it's
Yeah.
but you got to train for that, and hills are part of riding and part of racing. So I say embrace them.
Absolutely. Like I got really into trying to do the ultra endurance stuff like
Mm,
as soon as COVID started because I tried to find a way to pretty much change racing and riding for me because we weren't going to be doing races that year. And I reached out to Leah Wilcox and she's just amazing at ultra endurance. She's winning all these races as a female and just setting records and everything. And I reached out to her on Instagram and I was like, "Well, what would you say? Like any tricks and tips?" And she was like, "Just get hours on the saddle and climb a lot of hills."
yeah.
And I was like, "All right, that's all it is." And obviously nutrition's, but that's the three things: just hours, hills, nutrition.
Yeah. Yeah. And not, the hours in the saddle are not spent at 90%. They're spent in your
Yeah,
70% range. And it's so much. People don't understand that. They just have to. I didn't understand it at first. I went hard. I mean, I was out there. Okay, 20 mile an hour was kind of my goal back then. And when you're pushing a 20-pound chrome molly bike, that's not a bad goal to have. And but now it's totally different. I mean, I wear a heart rate monitor. I've had 2 heart attacks, so it's kind of critical for me to monitor where I'm at. And I just turned 60, so even more so, my heart zones are dropping. But if I look at my heart health on my Garmin, it says you have the cardiac build of a 50-year-old. I'm like, yes. And
yeah,
that's
that's a
all from
win.
those, the LSD or long slow distance that they used to call it. I think they use a different term for it now, but I still call it LSD.
Yeah, I always called it my all day pace, and
Yeah.
I would just ride at my all day pace. And then I think when I was the most fit would be when I would do my all day pace, and then I'd go to one or two group rides through the entire week. And the group rides weren't long, maybe an hour, hour and a half, but
Hmm.
like that was kind of the training aspect of it. But for the rest of the 10 to 12 hours through the week, it would just be constant, just like 15, 60 miles per hour, just kind of cruising.
Yeah.
But then you could turn it up if you need to. So you definitely have to focus on those heart rates and just realize what your body can sustain for that long of time.
Yeah, and also, I mean, put some intervals in there too, because that's where you teach your body how, if you're in a pack and you're on a road race and you take a corner, you're either going to yo-yo and be dropped, or you're going to catch back up. And to catch back up, the guys that are leading the pack, they're not losing any speed going into that corner. You may end up having because you may be in with a lot of guys and don't pump the brakes. But if you have to, that's all that much more energy you have to expend. And intervals is the way you teach your body to do that and to respond to those high intensity moments, especially sprints at the end. Incidentally, I've got one story I love to share, and I don't think I've ever shared it with anybody significantly. So my torpedo, when I was in Lenox, Mass, and I was doing the cycling instructor thing, ended up sprinting with this guy named Joe. Now his legs were massive, his quads were just, they were like tree trunks, and mine are, of course you don't have to have big legs. The power, the ratio, he had a lot more weight on me, but I put into this and I actually bent one of my dropouts. I put so much torque. Yeah. I was
That's
really
awesome.
strong back then.
Yeah, that's
And
sweet.
we're like 25 miles from camp, and I'm like, how do you fix a dropout? So I end up taking it off, pull the quick release, and I take it over to a curb, and I find a rock, and I'm just like pounding it to where I get it back in. And it wasn't until I got another bike a few years later, it was a Cannondale, and it had a breakaway dropout to where you could replace it. And I thought,
Oh,
that's
nice.
genius, because this was all built in. But yeah, that's a lot of torque to twist a dropout like that.
I would just call someone, get them to pick me up, and just hang that on the wall and be like,
Yeah.
"This is a monument to how strong I am."
Well, I look back now, and I'm 5'7", 140 pounds. I'm built like a climber, or I'm built like a sprinter, all depending, kind of like a Cavendish, if you will. He's just a little bitty guy, or who's the guy from
Hmm.
Australia? Um, can't think of his name, but two small, powerful guys. They're not the big, brawny
Oh,
uh,
Lachlan Morton or Mitch Bowen.
Morton. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, Lachlan Morton. Yeah,
yeah. Lachlan. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, and man, you see those guys go, and it's just like they could break a drop out.
yeah, for real. Because I mean, that's the craziest thing too is like seeing the guys in the Tour de France, and they're string beans. Let's be
Yeah.
honest, they're tiny,
Well, from the
but they're
waist up. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the watts that they can generate is just
Oh,
ungodly. Like it's crazy, and
yeah.
how long they can sustain it, and just their FTP peaks and stuff is just
Yeah.
ridiculous. And it's so amazing that
Yeah.
they can pack that much punch.
Well, even the climbers going uphill, man, they're talking about, oh, he's sustaining 400 plus watts over this 3 mile climb, or, in the Pyrenees. And this last year, as I was watching it, these guys are hitting like 16, 20% incline. Dang, I mean, I hit a 10 or a 12 percenter, and I'm struggling, maybe 5 miles an hour, but
Yeah, yeah. I
I'm
mean,
cranking it out. These guys are going 10, twice what I could. Wow.
yeah. I mean, if I hit that, I would either be passing out or crying because that'd be brutal.
Yeah. There was the first triathlon that I did back this year. It was the Tulsa Tri, and the there was one section where they called them rollers. This, I don't remember exactly what the incline was, but I think it was in excess of 15%. This was the first hill I've ever had to walk. And it was because I chose a different gear ratio for my rear wheel. I did not choose the right, combination. So I jump off, and I'm walking up in my braces, and I come across somebody that had lost their lunch on the hill.
Oh,
And as I'm standing at the the end of the race, and they're doing the award ceremony, and I know I'm not getting an award, but I like to see who wins. And I'm telling this story, and all of a sudden the guy next to me goes, "Yeah, that was me." I'm so sorry, but you must have put out an effort for that to happen.
yeah.
That was solid.
And it's like, no, I just ate way too close to the race.
Yeah. But it was a fun race. It was a kind of a nice spring warm up race.
So now, what's next on the calendar for you, or what's the next goal or achievement that you want to try to knock out?
Well, right now is I'm doing a lot of fundraising, or trying to do a lot of fundraising for USA Triathlon Foundation. So this next weekend, I'm setting up at the Down Syndrome Festival, because USA Triathlon has opened up an intellectual disabilities category, and I'm friends with a young man that is a pioneer from a Down syndrome standpoint doing triathlon. And I follow another guy that on Facebook. His name is Chris and Nikic. I can't pronounce it. I don't know how to pronounce his last name, but he was the first guy with Down syndrome to actually do an Ironman, and he is all over the place. He's an incredible athlete.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I feel like I know about him.
So I'm out there trying to recruit people, into this, because again, the sport is life changing. Even if they only do one of the three, it can be life changing. And just because you have an intellectual disability does not mean you have the inability to do things physically. Some of these kids may be a little more challenged from that aspect, but if you find the ones that aren't, you know what? It's a great release for the parents. It's a great release for the kids. And I mean, it's, if you've ever witnessed Special Olympics, they love to compete and they love each other so much after the competition. It's not, they're not butting heads as much as it's a great job. And I just want to be able to give back to that. And so I'm doing that, and I'm setting it up at a couple of triathlons, trying to represent the foundation and see what I can do to put some money in the coffer so we can help other people, enter the sport.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's so fantastic. I'll try to get a link from you or something to where the
Sure.
listeners can try to donate to that as well, because that's what I've learned with cycling is that the community is fantastic, and it's what makes cycling cycling as well. I mean, yeah, you have some stuck up people, but that's in all aspects of life, regardless of
Yeah.
cycling or whatever. There will always be those types of people. But for the most part, once you cross that finish line, everyone's usually like, that is so amazing. It's like, oh, this is my first race. So great. What did you think? And they're very curious about your experiences, and they want to congratulate you, and they just want to cheer you on, and vice versa. So just being a part of a community like that, it's very special.
Yeah. I mean, it builds on itself, and, you need a lot of that self reassurance. And a lot of people will keep you accountable from a cycling perspective. If you're just starting out, they don't want you to be too hard on yourself. And I think that's where the attrition comes in, is that people aren't measuring themselves by, their last ride. They're measuring it against all the other people that are out there. And you can't do that. But what you can do is go to them for advice, go to them for support, and, go to them for encouragement, which, I love being around other cyclists. I may be the last guy on the pack, but if it's a no drop, I don't have to worry about, not making it home, or, not being able to have a conversation with somebody next to me, because they're going to be there to support me regardless. I recently had the good fortune of being on the set of Tulsa King, which is the Sylvester Stallone series that's going to come out on Paramount here in November. They filmed it here in Oklahoma City. We've got
Oh,
a
nice.
burgeoning film industry going on here locally. And so I applied to be an extra, and I was out there and ran onto this young guy, and I was telling him my story, and he's like, "Oh my gosh." He goes, "I feel so weak now. To hearing what you did and what you're doing." He goes, "I so want to go out and do something like this." And all because I told him my story. And that's it. It's super heartwarming for me to hear that. And really, that's the effect of me wanting to tell my story after all these years, is so that I can engage with people and get them out there trying something like this, and changing their life. And not that I want them to circle back telling me how it changed their life, but I would love to hear it at some point in time, if they did it, if they continued doing it. Because I know for all the years that I've only told it to a few people, the few people that I've told it to took note of what I was doing with my cycling or with triathlon, and they started doing it as well. So I know I've touched lives in the past. I hope to touch more going forward, and impact the sport that I helped start, that is now Paralympics. And my goal, if I'm throwing a goal out there, is I'd love to be able to go to the Olympics, and at least have some input into the paratriathlon aspect of calling a race. Because I mean, how often do you have one of the first two guys that started the sport go out there and call the sport? Um, and I'm not a huge fan of the short courses where, they lap, and it's
Hmm.
draft legal. I was always anti-draft, unless I was, riding in a pack and not racing. But I get that, if you're in an urban area and you have all these participants, you don't want to see them go 25 miles out this way and then wait for 45 minutes for them to come back. That can be a little old. So it is kind of cool,
Yeah.
but I'd love to be able to talk to some of these young athletes that are now doing these amazing things, tell them my story. Because without I mean, you got this future, but you also have the past, and it's important for that story to be told, and it hasn't been told up until now. There's just nothing out there until I'm starting to write it and starting to share my story. So
Yeah, and that's always interesting too. I mean, I can speak from my personal experience, but you never fully know your impact. And it's like I've had random people come up to me and message me on Facebook and they're like, "Oh, I love the podcast or I love what you're trying to do and stuff like that." I'm like, "I didn't even know you rode a bike and like I didn't know you followed it and all this stuff." So I'm like, "That's pretty amazing." And you
yeah,
never know the ripple effect and positivity that you put and how it actually affects people. So yeah, when people actually let you know, it's so kind of heartwarming to know that, be like, wow, I did have an impact on that person. So
yeah.
that's great.
My neighbor, when I first moved to this house where I live now, we've been here for going on 11 years now. When I first moved in was when I was trying to make my attempt to get back into triathlon. I had just started to get some good physical health. It was before my diagnosis with arachnoiditis, and I bought a Quintana Roo tri bike, and I was telling my neighbor about it. This is when I just ordered it, and it was getting ready to deliver. I bought it on eBay, I think, and he's like, "Oh man, I need to get my bike out." And a couple of years later, maybe less than that, he ends up buying a giant uh, carbon fiber frame, nice, beautiful bike, and we start riding together. And then just last year or year before last, his two sons, because I talked triathlon and told them about having done a triathlon, though never knowing what my history was. His two sons started training for triathlon. And I'm like, I don't know if that was because of me, but maybe they didn't know triathlon before we started talking about it. And here's this little short, nothing guy that did it. So why can't I? They all tower over me. They're all huge, 6+ feet. And, I always look up to them, but great guys. And I loved it when I heard they were going to do a triathlon. I mean, that's exciting for me.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I want to have a positive effect on people.
Yeah.
That's really like with anything that I do, I only want to have a positive effect on people. And yeah, that's obviously what you're doing and it's just so fantastic.
Thank you. Thank you. Really. And I really appreciate the opportunity. This has been such a pleasure. I mean, the dialogue, about the history. I've talked about stuff that I haven't even thought about in years, to be honest with you. And it's just great to knock those cobwebs off and talk old bikes and old things. So, yeah, with the young generation, right? How old are you now?
So I will be turning 30 next month.
Oh, man, you're half my age. That's awesome. Good for
Yeah,
you.
so I'm like
Man,
I'm kind of dreading it. I don't know why, but I'm just like, "Oh, 30, like it feels like it gets real." I don't know why. I don't know what gets real, but it feels like it gets real at 30. And so
yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, I just like count down the days."
Yeah, I mean, when I turned 30, it was kind of a jump to maturity, because
Mhm.
30, kind of signals responsibility.
Yeah.
And I mean, there's so much that comes just with the mentality. Now, I'll say turning 60 is no big deal. Not for me anyway. It was like, okay, I'm older. It's not a big deal. I'm still doing all these things, and I'm kind of writing the final chapter of my life. I told my neighbor my life happens in 20-year segments. 0 to 20 was formative. 20 to 40 was when I had my accident, made history, got married, and then 40 to 60 I had kids. So now 60 to 80 is all about motivational speaking and telling my story that I wrote so many years ago. And I said, when I die, I've got one person per each 20-year segment that will eulogize me, and they'll capture everything because they spent a majority of time with me and knew what I was trying to do at that point. But enjoy 30, man. I mean, it's between 30 and 60. It takes a long time to get where I'm at, but keep on riding because you will thank your lucky stars you were turning pedals at 60. I promise you. Um, it's just, and it's good for your heart health as well.
Yeah,
Definitely.
definitely, absolutely. And just Yeah, overall health for sure. Because and especially that there's so many different ways to get enjoyment out of cycling. Like you don't have to
Yeah.
go, you don't have to race if you don't want to, you don't have to do anything. You can just do strolls on the greenway, you can commute, you can go bike packing, whatever. But there's so
Yeah.
many different avenues that you can do to find
Beach
enjoyment out
cruising.
of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
exactly.
Yeah. So
It's so awesome. And yeah, thank you for being on the episode. It's been so great to talk to you. And yeah, once again, just like-minded people talking about bikes. I can't think of a better thing. So
yeah.
thank
Oh
you for
yeah.
being on the episode, and I would love to have you on again.
Oh hey, I welcome the opportunity, and next time have to have a wheat beer or something to make the conversation go down. Beer and cycling goes together hand in hand like nobody's business.